Hi, child development students. We are going to talk about Chapter 3 today, Inclusive Programs for Young Children. You can see here I've included some photos of my little guy, Coco. The one on the top is his photo from the Napa Center website. So that's him posing with the teacher from the preschool program at Napa Kids Academy. And then the lower picture is the photo of him at the library, our local library, with one of his nurses. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of example of what inclusivity looks like from the perspective of my little guy, Coco. So there are several different types of inclusive programs as per the textbook Chapter 3. Many of these you are familiar with because these are programs that include both general education students and special education. So it's both typical along with those who have exceptionality. So family child care is where care is provided in someone's home for usually about 6 or fewer children. And in some states, they have licenses for more. Then we have the center-based child care, where child care is provided in a separate setting, similar to a school. So here at West LA campus, we have our CDC, our Child Development Center. That would be an example of a center child care. They are multiple providers and one-to-many classrooms. The staff-to-child ratios are set by the state. So you'll notice that it's usually a low ratio, anywhere from 8 to 12 students per one adult, usually in the U.S. In addition, we also have corporate childcare. Those are business-run childcare for their employees. And this is nice because employees can visit their children more often. I have a good friend who works at Lakeshore Learning, and her kids were able to go to the childcare, from birth up through school because she worked for Lakeshore, and they had a really nice setup with corporate childcare. We also have preschool programs that serve ages 3 to 5. So these are usually half-day programs. We have public school preschool programs. Preschool offered in the public school can be compensatory education for children who are disadvantaged. So again, compensatory, it's a big word, but it basically means that the government is trying to compensate for an area that is lacking. So usually for at-risk students of color or students who, come from a low socioeconomic background, there are often opportunities for them to get compensatory education. And that's usually provided by subsidiaries, supplemental grants, and other sorts of government funding. Some states offering preschool to all 4-year-olds, where they get free preschool for 4-year-olds in some states. We also have community-based programs, and those are run by community with heavy parent involvement. Those are often called parent co-ops. If you see the photo right next to me, you'll see an example of a parent cooperative, and these are nice because there is high parental involvement. So obviously that's great for the community, the classroom community, because the teachers and the parents and the children are working alongside each other. But it's also got its limitations. What do you think some of those limitations can be? Definitely the time factor. So a lot of parents, they don't have, 15 hours a week that they can spend in their child's classroom. So obviously there are some limitations there. There are also religious organization-based programs. Those are found in churches, temples, and religious community centers. Religious and cultural emphasis in addition to learning activities. So there are a lot of churches that do offer preschool programs, and those have benefits for families as well, and often come at a low cost. So one more popular early childhood preschool program is Head Start. So Head Start began in 1965, and it was specifically for low-income families. There is an increase in school readiness for young children. It now serves over 900,000 children. 10% of the population must be children with documented special needs, and Early Head Start serves children ages birth to 5, pregnant women, and their families. So Head Start is a really important part of our community and a lot of families because it provides them opportunities for early child care in situations where maybe they wouldn't be able to afford them. So there were some challenges a few years ago, and I would say starting in about 2007, where there was some discussion that there were no research founded benefits of Head Start. And so, of course, the proponents of Head Start argued this, and a lot of Head Start programs were scrutinized and evaluated to hopefully eliminate the ones that weren't doing as well, and then kind of raise the bar, raise the expectations, the criteria, accountability for other Head Starts. So it's good that they are now still going strong, because it's a great benefit to a lot of families. And studies show that if students enter school ready after having gone to preschool, then obviously they're going to be on a trajectory for better school success, after preschool and after elementary going into secondary school. There's also school-aged children programs that also use the inclusive model. Public and some private offer services to children ages kindergarten and up. A full range of services may be available as well. And then there are also before and after school care that can be available as well. We also have recreation programs. These are more of those enrichment programs, and those can include sport, arts, dance, and music classes. Many are inclusive and provide opportunities for all children. System of supports and services. So we have a joint position paper by DEC, which is the Division of Early Childhood, and NACCE, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Oftentimes NACCE puts out a position paper, and I highly, highly recommend you take a look at these. In fact, I put this particular one in the resources section of your module for this week. So make sure you check it out. You'll see the article in its entirety. But these position papers basically take the best practices based on research on a given topic. So in this particular case, in 2009, DEC and NACCE, they did a joint position paper on inclusion. And so one of the recommendations, as noted in the position paper, is to establish a system of services and supports that reflects the needs of children with varying disabilities. So I think this kind of goes to the idea of universal access, which is don't wait until you have children with special needs or specific exceptionalities to then go and make changes to the curriculum or to the environment, but rather provide an environment that already has universal access, so that when children with varying exceptionalities come into the classroom, you already have accommodations laid out, and then you can just cater those or differentiate those based on that child's individual needs. But in general, you've already have a very inclusive environment that's set up and it's accommodating to the child. So we have recommended best practices. So think about, what do you think are some best practices for any classroom, for any early childhood or elementary program? What are some best practices that you can think of? And then think of, okay, well, if I add best practices for inclusive programs, what practices would be the same? What practices might change? Am I going to add any practices that would be more inclusive for those children? Or would it just be the same as it would be for typical children? So I think that's an interesting question. So we have to think about research-based or value-based practices. So in other words, research-based would be supported by empirical research. So based on what you can see, what you can observe, not personal or societal reflection. And then we have family-centered practices, and those include the family and realizes that the child is a family member, not a separate identity. And I think this is really big. This is one of the themes, I think, throughout the class, and any class that deals with early childhood special education, I think, because if you think about, let's say when you're putting together an IFSP, it's an individual family service plan. So a big emphasis is on the family and how the family is going to be involved, how the family is going to support the child or children to, have their needs met and to reach their goals. So I think the idea of family as the center is a really key element of special education, really should be of general education as well. But the idea that the child in the family is part of the family, not a separate identity. And then we also have multicultural practices, identify family, uniqueness, and cultural competence. And this is important to keep in mind as well. And this comes back to being a culturally responsive practitioner. We have to think about how cultures vary and how views about practices, even views about the child's exceptionality, can be viewed differently from culture to culture. So I think it's important to try to be as culturally responsive as possible and to try not to force our own cultural relativity onto a family. So making sure that we understand some families, the idea of special education or having a child with special needs is not viewed the same. And so we have to keep that in mind when we use terms like, oh, the family is in denial or the family doesn't want to seek help. There might be other issues that we need to be sensitive to so that we can help support the family rather than passing judgment. So that's important to keep in mind. Also, there's cross-disciplinary practices, and this is important. This is when you have all professionals working together as a team from different disciplines. So you might have the special education teacher working with the gen ed teacher, working with the adaptive PE teacher, working with other specialists in the classroom, working with the administration. So cross-disciplinary practices is really important. We also have developmentally chronologically age-appropriate practices. So if you took Child Development 2, that was a big push, is what is developmentally appropriate. So something that you would do for a 6-month-old would be different developmentally than what you would do for a 6-year-old. So we need to understand child development and the impact on child and family. Also normalize practices, providing activities for children with disabilities to participate with their peers. So this is kind of the cornerstone of inclusion, the idea that children with disabilities can still participate and join in with activities with general education or typical children. So if we're looking specifically at the age from birth to age 2 in inclusive programs, one of the biggest things that you may remember from Child Development 1 are relationships among caregivers and children. So one of the things that you would want to do in an inclusive program for this age group is to create an enabling environment. And so what does that include? So the children should have lots of opportunities to interact with their environment. Communication should be intentional. So if you have, rap music playing in the background and you're rapping along, make sure that you know that it's appropriate and that it's something that, is not going to be offensive or, upset the child. So communication is intentional. Interactions foster child's sense of self-control. Infants are given opportunities to respond to people and situations. So a lot of interaction, there could be some motherese going on, pretend play, a lot of bonding going on. And going back to the second bullet, communication is intentional. My example about rap music was kind of a lame one, I will admit. It just was something that I came up with on the top of my head, but my husband, I think, would scoff because he is a hip hop music aficionado. So I think that was it was not a culturally responsive example. So my apologies for that. But my point that I was trying to make is that, making sure that communication is intentional. So, whatever communication that you're having with the child, you're thinking about how developmentally appropriate it is. And even if it's something that is, maybe for an older child, you just want to make sure that you're thinking through what are the benefits to this child, whether it's, if it is music and it's pop music, is the tune catchy? Is it something that, you can change the words and make up words to sing along to what the child is doing, and then it becomes fun. It's something that something from pop culture, and then you're changing the words to describe, it's diaper changing time or something like that. So thinking about communication, being intentional. So we also want to talk about environment and experiences. So children are allowed to and expected to interact with their surroundings. So this is why we have baby proofing, because we know that when children explore their environment, they're going to use their hands, they're going to put things in their mouth, especially once they become mobile. And this is all the natural progression of development. And so we have to anticipate it and then make sure that children are safe, but making sure that we provide things in the environment that they can interact with and that are developmentally appropriate, because that's all part of the learning and growing process. Children engage with activities that are developmentally appropriate. We want to make sure, again, that whatever toys or items that we have are developmentally appropriate. And thinking about some children with special needs, developmentally appropriate may not be according to their age. It's just developmental. So my son, for example, Colson, he'll be turning 5, and developmentally currently he's probably between a 3 to 6 month old. So we're giving him infant toys, things that are colorful, things that he can put in his mouth, things that are cause and effect based, where they light up and you push a button and something pops out. And so that's developmentally appropriate for him at this time. You also want to make sure that routines are predictable. And I know sometimes this can be challenging, but it's really important for the little ones to have a routine. So you'll notice in a lot of programs, everything is very structured. So even, you have your circle time, and then you might have even free play time. It's still structured into the schedule. So that every day between 10:15 and 10:30 is free play, for example. And then you might have your meal time and then your outdoor play, etc. So making sure that it's predictable, that's helpful for the development of little ones. And then also making sure that these programs encourage and support active exploration. And so again, that's really, really important for young children to be able to explore their environment without feeling like they're going to be in danger, or whether it's forbidden. So giving them an opportunity to play. Excuse me. And also equipment for this age group. Make sure that it's bright, colorful, well organized. Appropriate materials can include sturdy picture books, household items. It's funny how many millions or probably billions of dollars the toy companies make off of infant toys. And I admit there's some great ones out there. I'm like, oh, well, they didn't have that when I was a kid. But then it's also ironic when you notice you spend money on these toys and all the kid wants to do is play with water bottles, or all they want to do is open a drawer and play with the empty Tupperware in the kitchen. So I think that's pretty funny. And it also just lets you know that sometimes the simplest things are just as effective to build the fine motor and gross motor skills. Keeping in mind, especially for little ones who are immobile, to build their gross motor skills, to have climbing apparatuses, mirrors is great too, and nesting toys. So nesting toys would be the toys where you have differing sizes, smaller to bigger, and then they can stack them. They can put things inside of each other or stack them into each other. So that would be an example of nesting toys. Also, we have to keep in mind health, safety, and nutrition. Obviously, that's important at any age, but particularly for the little ones, because we're building, those building blocks towards strong health later on in life. So making sure that centers are following safety guidelines when purchasing toys and materials, making sure we sanitize, because as we know at this age, oftentimes they're in the sensory motor stage of development, and so they're learning things through their senses, through putting things in their mouth, etc. And so we want to make sure that things are clean so we're not spreading germs. We talk about this a lot in CD10 if you haven't taken it already. So prepare well-balanced menus, being mindful of allergies. And that's something that's really, really prevalent today, that we have to make sure that we know what sorts of allergies children have. And some allergies might be quite severe, that even though they're not ingesting the allergy, just being in a room with somebody who might be eating peanuts, for example, might result in an allergic reaction. So just making sure that you are aware and that you're being mindful about allergies that might arise. Also, reciprocal relationships with families. Parents are the primary caregivers, or whoever those caregivers might be. Might not be parents, might be another family member. Positive interactions are key. So share information about their child, demonstrate respect for family's culture, language, and life choices, and respond respectfully to parents' questions, comments, and concerns. So just remembering, first and foremost, this is the caregiver's child. They are there because they care about their well-being, and so that should be at the forefront, even if perhaps the parents' views are not the same as your views, or you're trying to get them to understand something about the classroom or their child, trying to find a common ground and making sure that you're always putting the family and their child's needs first. So now looking at ages 3 to 5, inclusive programs for children ages 3 to 5, creating a caring community of learners. So learning communities are developed where children celebrate the accomplishments of one or all. Social relationships, collaboration between child and adult, and between teachers and families exist. So I want you to try to think back, if you can, try to think back to your childhood, and to, if you can't think back to ages 3 to 5, think back as far as you can, maybe kindergarten, first grade, second grade, or if you work in a child program, if you're a teacher's assistant, or you have your own classroom, think about how we go about creating a community of learners. What are some memories that you have for feeling like you were part of a community of learners? And what did that look like? Can you envision it? Can you think back? Can you recall situations where there was collaboration between child and adult, and between teachers and families? So that's really important. So hopefully you're able to think of something, even if you didn't have a memory of it. Perhaps you've witnessed it in your own children's classrooms or in your place of employment. And if you didn't, if you weren't able to think of anything, what might be some examples of ways to create a community of learners? Also, teaching to enhance development and learning. Children are engaged in developmentally and age-appropriate activities. So going back to developmentally appropriate practice, another thing that comes up quite a bit. The environment should invite and support learning. So if you have an environment that has everything's gated off, or there are a lot of things that are off limits for those particular children, or you have things that are not safe, you have sharp edges or things that are broken, well, that's not inviting, nor does it support learning. The environment should match varying abilities. So in the age 3 to 5 group, especially in an inclusive classroom, you're going to have various levels of ability. So you want to definitely have an environment that matches. So for example, I'll use my son again. When he was at Napa Center for Preschool, he was one of the non-ambulatory children in the classroom, but there were also children in the classroom who were mobile. So there were toys in the classroom that were available for the ambulatory children to choose from, but then there were also toys that were more appropriate for my son, who was often in a wheelchair. So you want to make sure that the environment matches the children who are in the classroom. And the teaching strategies also should support child independence and self-determination and creativity. And that goes for all children. You want to give them some opportunities to make choices and to be creative. Also, you want to have an appropriate curriculum. So even though, early childhood, a lot of times people have the false assumption that it's just all fun and games. You just kind of do arts and crafts and you color all day. Well, any good program is going to have a very intentional curriculum. And so the curriculum should be based on some sort of developmental milestones, whether it's the preschool foundations, whether it's Common Core standards. there should be some sort of rationale behind why you are presenting the child with this particular learning opportunity. So one aspect would be social emotional development. Social skills and peer relationships is one of the major competencies. And so that's something that you want to foster and hopefully start to develop in your age 3 to 5 children. Social skills must respect child's culture. So again, this is another area where you want to be culturally responsive and not necessarily enforce your views. And that's why it's important to get to know the children's families if you're working in a center, because you may not know. We might assume based on how we were raised or based on, our culture in this particular community that interactions might look one way, but then finding out from another family about what they feel comfortable with regards to interactions in the classroom might look different. And so then you have to have a conversation about how you can respect their culture and also give students in the classroom an opportunity for those developmentally appropriate interactions. Communication and literacy development are also key. You want to make sure that there's functional communication and emerging literacy. Those are essential. So functional communication would be being able to have the opportunity to express your wants and needs, to communicate basic needs, and then emerging literacy. So what are the things that children begin as they learn, just phonemic awareness or the features of print, for example, like what's the front of the book, the back of the book, there are pages, there are images. Words can go from left to right or just images. What's an image? An apple, seeing an apple right side up versus seeing it laying on its side. These are very basic things that children will begin to notice. And these are emerging literacy skills. Also, with regards to constructing an appropriate curriculum, we want to make sure that for physical development, there are daily opportunities for developing gross and fine motor activities. And then with regards to aesthetic development, experiences in art and music should be made available daily. And I love that the textbook includes this in the PowerPoint and says that it should be required that there's experiences in art and music, because we know, unfortunately, in a lot of programs, those sort of seen as extracurricular things like art, music, dance, are often cut from programs, but our children benefit from them greatly, and they should be part of a normal curriculum. They should be included, in my opinion. And also assessing children's learning and development. We want to assess children to determine what to teach. Developmental domains. Oops, sorry, the picture is a little bit bigger. That was a picture of my son, and he made it to the Napa website. So let me just shrink that down a little bit so that you can see a little bit better. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So we want to assess children to determine what to teach. And I think this is key. It sounds like common sense, but it's important to keep in mind, well, how do we know where the students are? How do we know what they already know and don't know? So by giving them an assessment, we can determine what it is that we need to teach. And then we can further their developmental domains. NCLB, also known as No Child Left Behind, required assessments for documentation and learning. Also, again, going back to the idea of the family unit and building community with children and their families, we have reciprocal relationships by establishing regular communication. That might look like newsletters. You see an example here, weekly and daily notes. And it's really important that we foster that communication, that two-way communication. One great way is with newsletters, providing parents opportunities to ask questions, to send notes back to teachers, emailing it, what have you. And also letting parents know what's going on in the classroom and giving them an opportunity to ask questions, but also making sure that the regular communication is not just negative. I know sometimes that's what happens, especially as children get a little bit older. We need to remember to also provide positive communication home for the children. Also, creating a caring community of learners. We need to make sure, and this is for ages 6 to 8, positive climates for learners and building democratic communities. What do we think that looks like for ages 6 to 8? So we're talking first, second, third grade. What might that look like? So again, think back to your time in school between first and third grade, or your own children, or places where you might work. How do we create positive climates for learning? How do we build democratic communities? What are some examples you can think of? I know at my son Noah's school, he's in the first grade now. His school does a lot of work with social and emotional learning. They have something that's called Community Circle, which is a restorative justice practice. I think it's great. So they have someone, a community leader, who comes into the classroom once a week for about 20-30 minutes and teaches them things about integrity and standing up for yourself and sharing and being a good friend and how to manage your emotions. And so I think it's really nice that it gives students a safe space to talk about these things and to understand that having these sorts of emotions and feelings is normal, but giving them a way to manage them and reflect on them and to problem solve, to mediate conflicts. I think it's really great. So I know a lot of schools are doing similar things. It's a big push in LAUSD, the whole restorative justice movement. A lot of schools are also implementing social emotional learning, or SEL curriculum as well. So I think, again, because the research is showing that this is something that's much needed. And unfortunately, we have a lot of negative outcomes in our society, all the school shootings and the pervasive issues of bullying, that I think educators are looking for ways to mitigate that. And so I think that's a good tool for young children to have. Also, we teach to enhance development and learning. So again, even in this age group, it's another emphasis. So student exploration and child-initiated inquiry. So this is when the students ask questions all the time. Why? 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 So while it might be frustrating or irritating, it's actually a great part of development, is that inquiry, asking questions, asking the whys. So try to encourage that when you can. Explicit academic instruction of basic skills. Play. I can't emphasize that enough. Play, play, play. Play is the work of children, giving them lots of opportunity to play. And active learning. Actively learning. Constructing an appropriate curriculum. So we want to establish a foundation for lifelong learning. I think this is interesting too, because as an educator, I say, I'm a lifelong learner. And hopefully as an educator, anyone who's an educator would hope to continue to learn. That's part of the journey of being an educator. But how do you instill that in children? How do you instill this desire, this intrinsic motivation for lifelong learning? Well, I was surprised when I went to my son's recent back to school night, and the teacher said, research shows that homework is not really effective in this age, and so we're not going to do homework. I will say I was quite relieved. Even as a teacher, when I taught elementary, I admit I gave quite a bit of homework, and if I were to go back, I would do things much differently. I think it's definitely more about quality over quantity. But at my son's school, they want to emphasize reading, and so that's his homework. We do reading every night, and the idea is that by eliminating homework, the children have more family time. And I really like that, because I think that, our lives are super duper busy and we don't have time to do a lot of, talking about building family community. That starts at home. But I also like the fact that now I have the choice as an educator, if I want to give my child work to do, or develop his writing skills, or work on his reading or math or what have you, then I can just provide that at home. So I like that I have the choice. Promoting self-esteem, also important, and often that's a part of the social emotional learning curriculum that a lot of schools are implementing, and develop confidence and independence. And I think a lot of us as adults can work on those skills too. Also, we have what's called integrated curriculum. We teach around themes. So I love this idea because this is where you're bringing in different disciplines together. So you might have a theme about perspectives or about community, and you're bringing in language arts around those themes, and then you're bringing in math that focuses on those themes, science, dance, art, etc. And so it's a really nice way to reinforce those themes because the children are getting them in multiple ways through multiple disciplines. And it's fun. I think it's really fun to be creative and think of ways to teach around a theme. We also call that emergent curriculum too, where based on what the children are interested in, a curriculum emerges. So if children are interested in, at my son's preschool, the children seem to be interested in animals. And so they came up with this whole pet hospital concept. And so the director to the preschool said, well, this is great. Let's kind of build on that. Let's take them into the community and visit a pet hospital. And then they bought them scrubs and stethoscopes. And then they had, they brought in more equipment so that the children could really play out that emergent curriculum of a veterinarian. So you can bring in, the science, you can bring in the math, you can bring in the language arts as they're developing the language around. So, I brought my cat in because he has a tummy ache, and the doctor, might say, well, what are some of the symptoms? And so the children are developing that language. And so you're bringing in the themes, and then you're hopefully integrating the curriculum around different disciplines around something that the kids are actually interested in. And then we resist boundaries between academic areas. So rather than saying, well, that's explicitly just what math is for, and then over here, this is explicitly what language arts is for, and then over there, that's explicitly what arts is for, we're now bringing those different areas together and then doing something amazing and fun that the children are going to remember. We also have guidance of social emotional development, peer relationships, friendships, self-control, self-assessment, and problem solving. So I like that this is included as well because, again, this is looking at the whole child. The whole child is not just focused on academics, but the social emotional development is important too. And then we have to assess the learning and development. These should be contextually based and formative. So contextually based means based on what the children are actually experiencing. So you don't want to make something that's culturally biased or something based on, what a child at a different school might have learned, but not the children at the school that you're assessing. And this sometimes can be the issue with standardized tests where they're not based on the context of the children who are actually taking the test. The other aspect is making sure that it's formative. So formative would be where you're monitoring what they're learning along the way versus a summative assessment would be an assessment over a period of time. It's usually, after the end of a unit or something where you're looking at what the children have learned in a comprehensive way versus formative is along the way, what are the children learning? And that way you're able to, it's more like you are looking at, it's an assessment for learning rather than an assessment of learning, which is what I would say a summative assessment is. So formative assessment and assessment for learning, you're determining, okay, this is where my students maybe the concepts are a bit fuzzy, so I need to go back and reteach. Or maybe my students already know this based on my formative assessment, so I can move past this concept and we can start on the next concept. And then we need to establish mistakes as not what children do not know, but how they arrived at the answer. And I think that's really important. That ties into one of the strong aspects of my teaching philosophy, which is the whole idea of growth mindset and what children believe about their intelligence and how it's important to make mistakes and learn from them. So I think it's really important to try to foster this idea in our students that it's not just about getting the right answer, it's about your thought process and how you're getting the answer. So in that case, a right answer can sometimes be, a wrong answer can sometimes be even more useful or helpful in your teaching because you're understanding what students' misunderstandings are. And so that way you can figure out what you need to go back and reteach. And then it also encourages divergent thinking for students to be able to say, even though I got the answer wrong, this is the way that I thought about it. And you might say, yeah, that's a great way to look at this concept or this problem. Let's try to think of how we can arrive at this particular answer, but the way that you're thinking is right on time. It's valuable. And so I think that's really something to think about. Progress reports and portfolios are typically used in ages 6 to 8, and observation is key. So if you are taking or have taken Child Development 34, we use lots of observation tools. So observation is really helpful, whether it's an anecdotal observation or frequency count. You're observing the child to see, where they are in their development, and perhaps determine what are some areas that we need to work on, that they need to strengthen. Also here, reciprocal relationship with parents. Develop a good working relationship, publish newsletters and weekly reports similar to the other ages, and encourage parents to volunteer and visit in the classroom. I included this picture here. This is at Grandview Elementary in the Mar Vista area. It's a school that I looked at for my son Colson. They have a really great inclusive program. So you can see here the children are at adaptive PE. So you have typical children also playing with children who have adaptive equipment, like the young man who's in a stander. So that's a great example of inclusive activity, inclusive and adaptive PE.